To try to respond to this comment from the Islamic perspective on poverty and making reference to, of course, the very interesting presentations of Father Puglisi, the first thing I would start with is actually reference to poverty, and I would probably end to how, in somehow, the Islamic traditional perspective would try to implement brotherhood in poverty. Now, doctrinally speaking, the concept of poverty is one of the main virtues of Islamic teachings, according to the Islamic tradition. And the term would be faqr, which means exactly poverty. But I think as in the Christian doctrine, it is a spiritual poverty or poverty of the spirit. And to make another Islamic reference, one of the 99 attributes of God, according to the Holy Quran and the Islamic doctrine, is Al-Ghani, which is normally translated as the rich, quality of being the rich. Now, exactly, Al-Ghani does not mean to be rich, but it actually means to be in somehow independent by richness interpreted in according to a worldly interpretation or grammar. So it's in somehow something that shows an attribute of God as being independent by the search for richness. So the ultimate richness is not to be in somehow a slave of richness, but it's to be in somehow sharing the principle of richness without being linked to any symbol that might in somehow associate our search for richness to richness. So it's a very, if I may say, maybe mystical interpretation, but this is exactly the translation of Al-Ghani. And this again helps us to go back to the term faqir or faqr, poverty, or fuqara for those who are practicing poverty in the plural, because it can be considered either one can be poor in terms of missing some material means or even recognition of justice or social welfare or any kind of support for having a wealthy and respectful life, but it also has a spiritual interpretation, which is really, I think, what would probably be something that is the teachings within the Christianity or all mystical traditions from all religions, but having Professor Puglisi made reference to St. Francis, all the rules of contemplative orders with different interpretations and centuries and with different paradigms of saints have in somehow the teaching that makes reference to poverty. But it is intended, at least according to the Islamic viewpoint, exactly as it is Al-Ghani for the richness of God, which means that to be a poor in the spiritual sense is actually to be in somehow harmoniously detached and not conditioned by material or physical or exterior means. Now, the challenge here is how to interpret being harmoniously detached, because this is a very important teaching of the Islamic masters. One can be detached in a non-harmonious way, and this is not being fuqara, this is not being poor. To be consistent with the spiritual rule for poverty means in somehow to practice and to be part of this world of the symbols, of the signs, of the science of revelation in immanence, but in somehow to take part of these teachings for an absolute higher and spiritual truth. So at the end, the harmony is the link between symbols and signs of poverty in this world, with a goal of to attain a true and a honest link to the principle of richness according to a spiritual dimension, which is the link to God Almighty and to God as the merciful in immanence and in transcendence. So the reason why I'm mentioning this is because according to Islamic doctrine and Islamic masters' teachings, this is a journey. This is a discipline. This is how to follow a rule in order to always be consistent with harmony and with the search for ultimate poverty. So poverty is not only an exterior lack of or missing of something, is actually missing something that we are looking for in terms of a spiritual ultimate and integral goal for mankind. And this goes exactly to a key word that we commented in our breakout session, that is mentioned in the document from James Puglisi, which is integral human development. This is very important because it is, of course, a key word for an office of the Holy See that in somehow helps us to consider mankind and human according to a secular, modern, physical, material, exterior dimension, but as something that needs an integral development in all fields and at all levels of heart, mind, and action in social responsibilities. So I think this is exactly in somehow what is could be an interpretation of the secret of being fuqara, of being faqr, of being poor. It means in somehow to have a concentration towards the principle of poverty or the principle of richness, but sharing richness and poverty as signs and symbols and experiences of a spiritual journey. Now, why this is very concretely linked to the encyclical, because if I may say, according to my reading and my interpretation of the encyclical, I would actually say that, of course, the main focus, which unfortunately I see it is not so well acknowledged by Christians, believers, is that the spiritual message of this encyclical is a very important source of inspiration and, if I may say, changement of mentality and of orientation for all Christian Catholic believers. This is the main focus for me, while unfortunately it tends to be rather a universal message for all mankind, believers and non-believers. And I agree that it is also a very important message for all believers and all creatures and citizens, but this should not avoid for Christian Catholics to really try to understand and follow the deep teachings that Brother James Puglisi so precisely in his second presentation gave on the encyclical, because the The challenge is either we understand and we follow and we put into practice those rules as an implementation of spiritual priority. Otherwise, there will be no fraternity, no cooperation, no understanding, and no sharing of peace and justice. So for me, it's a very important situation. And there are three documents, Jerusalem, Cuba, and Abu Dhabi, that are, according to my vision, what I would call stations of brotherhood. And even just to speak in very superficial ways, the fact that he has been sharing these moments with brothers of other faiths, such as the Jewish leaders of Israel, such as the Orthodox Greek Patriarch and the Orthodox Russian Patriarch, and two Muslim leaders recently in Abu Dhabi with Sheikh Ahmed al-Tayyib, and in Iraq with Sheikh al-Sistani, is in somehow for me a concrete example that accompanies his message, his invitation to brotherhood in concrete terms. He helps us, and he helps, if I may say, all Christian Catholic believers and all Christians and all believers maybe that want to rely on his teachings to overcome any kind of apologetic exclusiveness of truth competing with the other communities and identities. Because I think that in somehow, as a Muslim European, his journey, his documents, his encyclicals are really in somehow showing an implementation in contemporary times of what could be the spiritual example of a poor saint and prophet for Muslims, such as Jesus, living and delivering a message of hope, brotherhood, peace, and justice in spiritual terms and in doctrinal terms and in ecumenical or interreligious cooperation terms. So not erasing and not challenging and not competing with any other field or grammar, but sticking to the Christian Catholic traditional doctrine and opening to a new era of respect in humility of brotherhood. And this is where, in somehow, maybe according to my vision, again, and this is my conclusion, his reference to Saint Francis' blessings is going back to, again, what, according to the Islamic perspective, is very close to the sacred concept of poverty, of faqr. And it is the roots of the contemplative interpretation of poverty, of brotherhood, of religious life, of sacredness, and also of social responsibility. Because it's actually only rediscovering our links and dependence to in our humble poorness towards the other, that we discover the true open-mindedness and open-heartedness towards the other, because we rediscover, as Ananda was mentioning, the presence of God Almighty in the other. So it's again God who is guiding and uniting the poor, sincere, and honest believers to be brothers in his name and to manage with a better inspiration the responsibilities in our contemporary society.